All right, so you want to take your English fluency up a notch.
Mm.
And, I mean, really sound like you belong in a conversation. Not like you're reading from a textbook,
Yeah,
The Secret Weapon. We're talking phrasal verbs.
definitely.
And lucky for us, you listeners have sent in some fascinating notes all about them, so let's dive in.
Sounds good.
Okay, so the source material kicks off with this clever analogy. Phrasal verbs are like spices in cooking.
Interesting.
Right. Spices make food more exciting, more complex. And that's exactly what phrasal verbs do for English.
It's a good way to think about it. They really do add that extra layer of, nuance and flow. Like you're not just, throwing bland ingredients together.
Exactly. And speaking of ingredients, I'm loving how this source material breaks things down by everyday situations. So, for example, in the casual socializing category,
Okay.
we've got catch up and come over. I mean, those are so common. I bet everyone listening has used them without even thinking about it.
Oh, for sure. And that's the thing with phrasal verbs. They become so natural, you don't even realize you're using them.
Yeah, until you have to explain them to someone.
Exactly. And then you're like, well, it means like,
Yeah, I know that feeling.
Yeah.
So it's those subtle differences that make phrasal verbs so tricky, but also so powerful.
Totally.
Speaking of powerful, I'm looking at the work and study section and look into and follow up. Just jump out at me. I feel like those are in every other email I send.
Oh, absolutely. They're essential in any office environment.
Right. Like, can you look into that? Or
Sure.
I'll follow up next week.
Classic. And you know what's funny about look into? It perfectly captures that feeling of like when your boss asks you to do something and you have no idea where to even begin.
Oh my gosh, yes. It's like that universal experience of just
Exactly. Like just nodding and smiling.
pretending you totally got it.
But really you're thinking, what does that even mean?
Okay, moving on to the shopping category. We've got try on and pick out, obviously useful if you're, fashionista.
Yeah.
But the source material makes this interesting connection between pick out and choosing a travel destination.
That is interesting.
Like, they're hinting at the versatility of these verbs, that
Yeah.
you're not just stuck in one specific situation.
Right. And that's a key point. While categories are helpful for learning, it's that flexibility that makes phrasal verbs so valuable.
Okay, I'm hooked. Let's see what other gems we can uncover. How about break up and make up from the relationship section?
The classic.
Classic choices. But I like that they can be applied metaphorically too. Like you can break up with a bad habit or make up with a friend after an argument.
Exactly. It goes beyond just romantic relationships. It's that core concept of, ending and reconciling that applies in so many situations.
Makes sense. Okay, let's touch on the travel phrasal verbs quickly. Set off, check in, get on off, even if you're not a jet setter. These are crucial for understanding everyday conversations and, following along with movies and TV shows.
Right. Especially media. Think about how often you hear phrasal verbs in movies and songs. They're everywhere.
So true. Okay, home life and emotions, really quick. We've got turn on for appliances, who hasn't struggled with those.
Oh.
And cheer up. Always a good one to have handy. Now, this problem section is interesting. We've got the obvious ones like figure out and carry on, but then there's give in. It seems a bit out of place.
Yeah. Why do you think that is?
Well, maybe it's because problem solving isn't always about finding the perfect solution. Sometimes it's about accepting the situation and moving forward.
That's a good point.
Right. Like sometimes you just got to give in and choose your battles.
I see what you mean. And it goes back to that nuance thing we were talking about. Even a simple verb like that can have so many layers of meaning depending on the context.
Absolutely. And to wrap up this section, I noticed there's a practice conversation in the source material that uses a bunch of these phrasal verbs in a really natural way. It's like seeing them in action.
Yeah, and it shows how effortlessly they can flow in real speech.
So we've established that phrasal verbs are more than just vocabulary. They're the building blocks of natural expressive English. And it seems like this source material is encouraging us to really dig deeper and see how they add depth and personality to our communication.
Absolutely. There's so much more to discover beyond just the basic definitions. Yeah, it's like they're giving you this whole toolbox, right? Full of different tools for different situations.
And the cool thing is you don't have to be like a language expert to figure them out.
Right.
The more you use them, the more they just kind of click.
Yeah, you start to get a feel for it.
And what's interesting? It's like phrasal verbs capture these little cultural nuances that are hard to explain otherwise.
That's a good point. Like take ketchup, for example. That implies a certain level of like familiarity, right? A casualness that you might not find in other languages.
Yeah, or the difference between drop by and visit.
Oh, yeah. Good one.
They both mean to go see someone, but drop by is way more casual. Like you're not making a big deal out of it.
Exactly. It's those little word choices that really show you understand the culture.
So it's not just about learning the words, it's like absorbing the culture behind them too.
I like that, absorbing the culture. It's like you're not just speaking the language, you're connecting with the people who speak it.
Okay, I'm ready to start throwing phrasal verbs into every conversation.
Yeah.
But I gotta admit, sometimes I get a little nervous about using them wrong.
I get it. It can be intimidating.
Is there like a secret formula for getting them right? Or is it just trial and error?
Well, there are some grammatical rules, of course, but honestly, a lot of it comes down to just practice and exposure. Like, pay attention to how native speakers use them in different situations.
So basically, immerse yourself in the language and it'll start to make sense.
Exactly. It's like learning a musical instrument. You wouldn't expect to play a concerto perfectly after a few lessons, right?
No way.
It takes time and dedication, and yeah, you're going to make mistakes along the way. But the more you practice, the more you develop that intuition for what sounds right.
That's a great analogy. And just like with music, you start to see the patterns and connections between different phrasal verbs.
Yeah, you start to develop a sense of which ones work best in which situations.
And that's when you really start to sound like a native speaker.
Totally. It's like you're fine-tuning your ear to the rhythms of the language.
I love that fine-tuning your ear. It's like you become this linguistic detective, uncovering all these hidden layers of meaning.
And the more you uncover, the more you realize just how rich and expressive English can be.
Okay, I'm convinced phrasal verbs are not just some grammar rule to check off a list. They're like a whole new world of linguistic expression.
They really are. And that's what makes language learning so exciting. It's not just about acquiring knowledge, it's about expanding your horizons, connecting with other cultures.
So do you have any practical tips for incorporating phrasal verbs into our everyday lives? Besides, carrying around a dictionary everywhere?
Well, one thing you can do is focus on a few key verbs at a time and then make a conscious effort to use them in your conversations.
So start small and build from there.
Exactly. It's like learning a new dance move.
Yeah.
You wouldn't try to master the whole routine at once, right?
You got to break it down.
Yeah. Break it down into manageable steps. And as you practice, those phrasal verbs will start to feel like natural extensions of your vocabulary.
Okay. Challenge accepted. I'm going to try to use at least 3 new phrasal verbs this week. What about you?
I'll aim for 5, but I'll try to sneak them into my writing. That's a fun way to challenge myself.
Love it. Maybe we'll inspire some of our listeners to do the same.
That would be awesome. The more people we can get excited about phrasal verbs, the better.
All right, so let's raise a glass to phrasal verbs, those little words that pack a big punch.
Cheers to that.
Yeah.
May our conversations be forever filled with their delightful quirks and turns.
Absolutely. And may we always be open to mixing things up and experimenting with language. After all, that's how we learn and grow and connect with each other.
Well said. It's all about enjoying the journey.
Speaking of enjoying the journey, do you have any favorite phrasal verbs? Ones that just make you smile or perfectly capture a certain feeling?
Ooh, that's a tough one. There are so many good ones. But I think dream up is definitely up there. It's just so whimsical.
Dream up.
Yeah, that's a good one.
And stumble upon. I love that one too. It perfectly describes that feeling of serendipity.
Ooh, yes. Like you weren't even looking for it and then bam.
Exactly. And of course, we can't forget lighten up. Always a good reminder to not take ourselves too seriously.
I love those choices. Okay, mine would have to be geek out. Because, let's be real, I love diving deep into things that fascinate me.
I can definitely see that.
And then there's zone out, essential for those mental breaks.
Yeah, we all need those.
And lastly, laugh it off. Sometimes that's the best way to deal with a tough situation.
So true. Those are great picks. They really reflect your personality.
Oh, thanks. It's amazing how much personality we can inject into our language just by choosing the right words.
Absolutely. Language is a powerful tool for self-expression.
Before we move on, I wanted to touch on one more point from the source material, the importance of context.
Ah, yes. Context is key with phrasal verbs.
Right. Because their meanings can change depending on the situation. Like take off, for example.
Oh, yeah. Good one. It could mean to remove clothing, to depart on a flight, or to become successful.
So many different meanings.
It all depends on the surrounding words and the overall situation.
Exactly. It's like learning a new game. You need to understand the rules before you can play effectively.
So it's not just about being grammatically correct. It's about being stylistically aware.
Precisely. It's about using language in a way that is both accurate and engaging.
I feel like we've really explored the ins and outs of phrasal verbs today. We went beyond the basics and looked at the nuances, the cultural significance.
And hopefully we've inspired our listeners to, embrace these little linguistic gems.
Speaking of inspiration, I have a feeling our deep dive today is going to spark a lot of creative conversations out there. It's like we've given our listeners a new set of tools to play with.
I hope so. It's always rewarding to see people discover the joy of language learning.
And who knows, maybe we'll even see a global surge in phrasal verb usage. Imagine a world where everyone's just effortlessly using these colorful expressions.
It would be amazing. It would be like a linguistic symphony.
Okay, I'm getting carried away with the metaphors, but you get the point.
I do.
I love that. Language is a journey. It really captures that feeling of like exploration, And phrasal verbs are those little hidden gems you find along the way. They add so much color.
And the cool thing is there are always new gems to be found.
Right.
The English language is always changing.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
New words and expressions are popping up all the time, and phrasal verbs are no exception.
It's true. Like, remember when binge watch became a thing? Suddenly everyone was using it?
Yeah.
And now we have swipe right and ghost from the world of dating apps and social media. It's fascinating to see how language adapts.
It really is. Like it's a reflection of our changing world.
So even though we've been focusing on some common phrasal verbs today, it's important to remember that there's always more out there.
Oh, absolutely. There are always new expressions to discover and new ways to surprise ourselves with language.
Right. Like who would have thought you could do so much with the verb look?
Yeah, look is a good example. Look up to, look down on, look out for.
Look back on. The list goes on and on.
It really does.
It just shows that even if you think you've mastered phrasal verbs, there's always more to learn.
It's a lifelong journey.
And that's what makes it so exciting.
Exactly.
Before we wrap up our deep dive today, I wanted to leave our listeners with a little challenge.
Ooh, I love a good challenge. What do you have in mind?
So I was thinking it would be fun if everyone listening picked one phrasal verb that we talked about today.
Okay.
And then made a conscious effort to use it in a real conversation this week.
Oh, I like that.
Right. Like really pay attention to how it feels to say it, how people react.
See if they even notice.
Yeah. It's a great way to put what we've learned into practice.
And to make those phrasal verbs a natural part of your vocabulary.
Exactly. And who knows, maybe it'll even lead to some interesting conversations.
You never know.
So to all our listeners out there, get out there and start phrasing. Experiment, have fun, and embrace the wonderful world of phrasal verbs.
Until next time, happy phrasing.
Happy phrasing, everyone. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the fascinating world of phrasal verbs. We hope you learned something new and feel inspired to add a little more spice to your English conversations. See you next time for another deep dive.